Three prisoners escaped Alcatraz. No guns, no boat waiting outside, no outside rescue team. They carved their way through the backs of their cells with homemade tools, climbed through a hidden service corridor, built a raft from stolen prison raincoats, and left fake human heads sleeping in their beds. By the time the guards realized what had happened, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin were already gone. But escaping the prison was only half the problem. Between them and freedom was the freezing, violent water of San Francisco Bay. And more than 60 years later, nobody can say for certain what happened next. It was early morning on June 12, 1962, inside Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The cell house was quiet. The prisoners were supposed to be exactly where guards had left them the night before. During the morning check, a guard approached one of the beds. A head rested on the pillow beneath the blanket. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then the guard touched it. The head moved and fell from the bed. It was fake. Within minutes, guards discovered something almost unthinkable. Frank Morris was gone. John Anglin was gone. Clarence Anglin was gone. Three prisoners had vanished from a prison built on an isolated island and surrounded by cold, dangerous water. To understand how they got that far, you have to go back months. Alcatraz was where the federal prison system sent men considered difficult to control elsewhere. The island sat in San Francisco Bay, separated from the mainland by water, currents, wind, and cold. Inside were locked cells, steel bars, guard towers, repeated counts, controlled movement, and almost nowhere to hide. Even if a prisoner somehow escaped the cell house, he would still be trapped on the island. The prison walls were only the first barrier, the bay was the second. Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960. He had already spent years moving through the American prison system and had a history of escape attempts. John Anglin arrived later that year. His brother Clarence followed in 1961. The men already knew one another from previous time in prison. Their cells were close together, and eventually they began working on something far more ambitious than a normal prison escape. A fourth inmate, Alan West, joined the plan. The first weakness they exploited was at the rear of their cells. Near the floor of each cell was a small ventilation opening. Behind the cell wall was a narrow utility corridor. If they could enlarge those openings enough to crawl through, the locked bars at the front of the cells would no longer matter. But they had to do it without the guards noticing. So the work happened slowly, quietly, a little at a time. Using crude homemade tools and scavenged equipment, the prisoners began cutting and drilling around the ventilation openings. One improvised drill reportedly used a motor taken from a broken vacuum cleaner. They weakened the concrete around the vents bit by bit. Then, whenever the work stopped, they covered the damage. Cardboard, painted material, objects placed carefully against the wall, anything that could make the opening appear normal during a quick inspection. Every day they had to destroy part of the prison. And every day they had to make it look as if nothing had changed. Eventually, the holes became large enough for the men to squeeze through. Behind the cells, they entered the utility corridor, and that changed everything. The corridor gave them access to the inside of the cell block structure. Using pipes and internal framework, they could climb upward behind the walls. Above the cells was a space guards rarely entered. The prisoners turned it into a secret workshop. Now they had somewhere outside their cells to hide tools and build the equipment they would need. But escaping the building was not enough. They still had to leave the island. Swimming directly across San Francisco Bay would be extremely dangerous. The water was cold, the currents could be powerful, and the distance was long enough that exhaustion could become deadly. So they decided to build a raft. Inside Alcatraz, without the guards discovering it. They began collecting prison raincoats, dozens of them. More than 50 raincoats were eventually used to make escape equipment. The rubberized material was cut and joined together. Seams were stitched and sealed. Heat from prison pipes helped bond sections of material. Slowly, in the hidden space above the cells, a homemade inflatable raft began taking shape. They also made life preservers. They built wooden paddles and they improvised a device that could help inflate the raft. Almost every piece of the escape had to be stolen, scavenged, modified, or handmade inside the prison. But there was still another problem. Even if the prisoners could leave their cells, guards continued checking them during the night. An empty bed could destroy the entire plan. So they built replacements, fake human heads. The decoys were shaped from scavenged materials and painted to resemble faces. Real human hair collected from the prison barbershop was added to make them more convincing. At night, each head could be placed on a pillow. Blankets could be arranged underneath to create the shape of a sleeping body. A guard looking through the bars, for only a moment, might see exactly what he expected to see. A prisoner asleep in bed. While the fake heads protected the illusion inside the cells, the real men continued working behind the walls. They also needed a route onto the roof. Above them was a ventilation opening at the top of a vertical shaft. The climb was roughly 30 feet. The men could use the pipes inside the structure to climb toward it. At the top, they worked on the ventilation cover until it could be removed. But even that had to remain unnoticed before the escape. According to investigators, they improvised a fake fastener so the cover could appear secured until the night they needed it. By June 1962, the plan had become an entire hidden escape system. The holes behind the cells, the utility corridor, the secret workshop, the raft, the life preservers, the paddles, the fake heads, the roof exit. Months of work had created one narrow route from a locked cell to the edge of San Francisco Bay. Then came the night of June 11, 1962. The men returned to their cells knowing that almost everything depended on the next few hours. They placed the fake heads on their pillows. They arranged the blankets to resemble sleeping bodies. Then they moved toward the openings behind their cells. Frank Morris got through, John Anglin got through, Clarence Anglin got through. Alan West did not. His opening was not ready enough for him to get out in time. He struggled to escape his cell while the others waited. But they could not wait forever. Every extra minute increased the risk that a guard would notice something. Eventually, Morris and the Anglin brothers continued without him. West was left behind. The three men entered the utility corridor and climbed upward behind the cell block. They reached the hidden workshop where months of preparation had been stored. They gathered the escape equipment. Then they climbed higher through the vertical shaft. At the top, they removed the ventilation cover. One after another, they emerged onto the roof of Alcatraz. For the first time that night, they were outside the cell house. But they were still on the island. They moved across the roof toward the rear of the building. From there, they descended toward the ground. They reached another barrier, a fence. They climbed over it. Now the prison building was behind them. The shoreline was ahead. Behind the walls, guards were still working through the night. Inside 3 cells, fake heads still rested on pillows. The escape had not yet been discovered. Morris and the Anglin brothers moved toward the northeast side of Alcatraz. At the water's edge, they reached the final stage of the plan. They had escaped their cells. They had escaped the cell house. They had crossed the prison grounds, but Alcatraz was an island, and the most dangerous part of the escape was still in front of them. They prepared the homemade raft. They inflated it. They gathered their paddles and life preservers. Then 3 men pushed away from Alcatraz and entered the dark water of San Francisco Bay, and this is where certainty ends. Everything before this point could be reconstructed from the physical evidence left inside the prison and from what Alan West later told investigators. But once the men entered the bay, the story becomes a mystery. Their intended route was believed to take them toward Angel Island before they tried to reach the mainland. But they were entering cold water in darkness, using an improvised raft built secretly inside a federal prison. Wind and currents could push them away from their planned route. A leak could destroy the raft. Cold water could incapacitate a swimmer quickly. One mistake could end the escape within minutes. Back inside Alcatraz, morning arrived. The fake heads were discovered. The alarm spread through the prison. Cells were searched. The enlarged openings in the walls were exposed. Guards followed the route behind the cells. The hidden utility corridor was no longer hidden. The secret workshop above the cell block was discovered. Investigators found tools, materials, evidence of the raft construction, evidence of months of planning happening almost directly above the guards. A massive search began. Boats searched the water, aircraft searched from above, shorelines were checked. Investigators looked for anything that could show where the men had gone. Authorities contacted relatives. They watched for stolen vehicles, stolen clothing, unusual phone calls, or any sign that Morris and the Anglin brothers had reached land. Over the following days, pieces of possible evidence appeared. Items connected to the escape were recovered. Parts believed to be connected to the raft or paddles were found. A homemade life preserver washed ashore. But investigators did not find the three men. No confirmed capture, no confirmed bodies. The FBI continued investigating the escape for 17 years. Agents followed leads across the United States and beyond. They examined reports claiming the men had been seen alive. They checked relatives and possible contacts. They investigated stories that appeared years after the escape. But none produced definitive proof that the three men had survived. The FBI's conclusion was that Morris and the Anglin brothers most likely died while attempting to cross the bay. The cold water, currents, and lack of confirmed evidence of survival supported that theory. But there was a problem. They could not prove it. No definitive evidence established that all three men drowned. And no definitive evidence established that all three reached freedom. In 1979, the FBI closed its investigation and transferred responsibility for the fugitives to the United States Marshal Service. But the mystery never disappeared. Because Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin did accomplish something extraordinary. They escaped their cells. They escaped the cell house. They reached the shoreline. And the evidence indicates that they launched their homemade raft into San Francisco Bay. After that, the trail disappears. Maybe the prison everyone believed was almost impossible to escape had one final barrier they could not beat. Maybe the bay killed them only minutes after they reached the water. Or maybe three prisoners spent months studying every weakness in Alcatraz, fooled the guards with fake heads, crossed the prison unseen, launched a raft built from stolen raincoats, and escaped one of America's most famous prisons forever.